Oh, yeah. Welcome back to another episode of Drafts with Jordan and Josh. I am one of your hosts, Mr. Jordan Plucker. With me, as per usual, is Josh Liskowitz. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing very well. It's championship weekend, man.
Woohoo! At least for some of the games. Yeah, you were totally disrespecting my Pac-12 off the air. I'm flustered.
It's still a championship.
I'm emotionally compromised. I don't know if I can do this pod. But what's on our schedule, if I don't break down and cry from all the bullying I've been taking from Josh, we're going to discuss, our top rookies of the year on the Talented Billy Moyes list. We are going to break down some of the Bears' needs on the roster with Mr. Lorin Cox and give the Bears some hope. And then we are going to also discuss some of the top prospects on the big games this weekend, like you said, buddy.
Yeah, this is a good lineup. It's going to be a good show.
Maybe. Drum roll, Josh. Actually, said Taylor. Taylor, drum roll here, please. So, Josh, we are going to be talking about the rookies and the Talented Billy Moyes Rookie of the Year watch list on ProFootballFocus.com. So, Josh, the top 5 players have not changed. They are still the same 5, although we did have one small shift. But let's catch everybody up to date with our NFL rookie rankings through Week 12, starting with number 1, Josh, Marshawn Lattimore, the corner from the Saints. He's got a PFF grade of 92.7, which is not just been the top of Billy's list here, but basically one of the best corners in the league when he's healthy. Really impressive.
Yeah, and unfortunately this past week he wasn't. And I think that was obviously a huge difference because Jared Goff went off. Yeah. And missing out on a player like Marshawn Lattimore was a huge issue for them. 92.7 overall grade, as you said. 47.4 passer rating. That's quarterbacks throwing into his coverage. That's 4th best of any corner in the league this year. So, I mean, you're talking top 4 numbers already as a rookie, and even though he's had to miss a couple games because of injury, there's not much else to say about him, but he's clearly going to be an elite guy for them for a long time, as long as he stays healthy.
At number 2 now, so this is our movement in the top 5. At number 2 now, we have Tre'Davious White, the corner for the Buffalo Bills. PFF grade of 89.0, and again, Josh, he keeps making plays week in and week out.
Yeah, consistency has been his hallmark, and I think I might have mentioned this, but again, still just one grade under 70.0 this year, one overall grade less than that. So He's been consistently near the top, and that's why he's up there. He's not quite at Lattimore status. I don't know at this point that he's going to be able to catch him, but Tre'Davious White has been boy, what a move by Buffalo still. And I feel like I go back to this every week, but the fact that they traded back when everyone assumed Lattimore was who they were going to take, they traded way back, get a extra first round pick for this year, and still get a guy that looks at this point like he might be number 2 in our Rookie of the Year final stats, considering we're going down the home stretch of the season. That's quite a move by the Buffalo Bills.
Indeed. All right, number 3 on the list, Kareem Hunt, the running back for the Chiefs. He was all the way up at the top for a while. He's dipped down to number 2. Now he's down to number 3. Still a very solid campaign. PFF grade of 88.5. And, while it's still, he's not on the same, again, torrid pace of September, Josh, he's still a very productive back.
Yeah, I think unfortunately for him, that offensive line has just really had some issues. And with that offense's inability to work the ball downfield, I don't know if you watched any of Kansas City's game this past week, but it was really frustrating. It was kind of reverting back to what we've seen in the past from Alex Smith, and I don't know if it's him or just a coaching game plan, but they seem to have taken away all the vertical options that they had the first month of the season that helped make it such a dynamic offense. And I think that hurts Kareem Hunt, and the injuries obviously do too. But that being said, he's forced 61 missed tackles on 220 touches this season. The next closest guy, the number 2 back in terms of forced missed tackles, that's Le'Veon Bell. And he's done his in almost 100 more touches, 313. So that's why Hunt is still up here, even though I know people are probably listening thinking, oh, he hasn't done anything for a month. Well, that might be relative to your fantasy team, but in reality, in terms of his grading and what he's doing on a per snap basis with what's given to him, he's still playing at a high level, especially for a rookie.
Yeah, the next player on the list, another running back who's playing really well. That's the silky smooth Alvin Kamara, running back for the Saints. Again, we're talking about another Saint, Josh. PFF grade of 87.7. Again, like when I watch him, when I see him, he just seems to be moving at a different pace and different style than everybody else. So it again allows him to really sort of juke around people, cause people to miss in creative ways. And just he's a lot of fun to watch, and he's really sort of catching fire here lately, Josh.
Yeah, my favorite stat on him is kind of 4 yards per carry. That's kind of the benchmark you have to at least get as a running back. Well, he's getting that after first contact.
That's really good.
That's absurd. That's really absurd. 4.03 yards after first contact. He's the only back in the league that's getting there. Obviously, he's got to split time a little bit in that backfield, but he's coming out more and more. And I hope they keep splitting this year because I think obviously they're a major contender heading into the playoffs. They're a significant Super Bowl contender in the NFC. I don't think there's any question of that now, and how they did this past weekend with some injuries doesn't change my mind on that. Certainly doesn't change your mind on Kamara, who had another huge day. But keeping him fresh and able to do what he's doing, he was one of those guys that there were a lot of PFFers that liked him, but at the same time, you weren't sure quite what you were going to get out of him this year. But as soon as you saw, he's going to New Orleans, yeah, that's a fit that's going to work. And it's panned out obviously better than we expected. But, man, is he a great fit, and they just know exactly how to use him.
All right, moving on to number 5, it is another corner. Desmond King, the corner from the Chargers. PFF grade of 87.5. I caught a glimpse, Josh. Remember I said every time I catch a glimpse of guys making a play, I caught a glimpse and looked up, and he had pick 6. Desmond King, and I was like, man, there he goes again. That guy just keeps making plays. So, yeah, I mean, it's like he's getting better, Josh.
Yeah, 9 corners in the league this year have played at least 290 snaps in coverage without allowing a score. He's one of those 9. So he's scored more than he's given up in terms of touchdowns, which is fun. That's generally that's not frowned upon if you're a corner. So
no, definitely not.
I mean, he's been excellent. This Chargers team, they're fun, man. They're putting things together. Obviously, they're kind of through a patch of their schedule where they're taking advantage of some teams that aren't playing very well. But in the past they've been losing those games and they've been tearing it up. And certainly a rookie like Desmond King has been part of the reason they've been able to really solidify that defense so well.
All right, well, that wraps up the top 5 on Billy's list. But before we head out, you can read the rest.
On whose list?
On the talented Billy Moy's list. But
the talented Billy Moy's list. That's right.
Billy Moy. Yeah, the rest of it there is on ProFootballFocus.com. But before we leave, Josh, I know that we wanted to touch on the fact that out of the top 6 players, because we're going to go to number 6 here, bonus coverage, everybody. Out of the top 6 players, Josh, 3 of them are frigging New Orleans Saints. So number 6, Ryan Ramczyk, tackle, New Orleans Saints, PFF grade 81.6. Josh, what a disgusting haul in this draft class.
Yeah, this is why this team is case in point of why people get so hyped up, so excited about the draft. Now, let's be honest. This draft class, this is a rare oddity because it's not just these 3 guys. These 3 guys are playing essentially at an elite NFL level right now. Mm-hmm. But these aren't the only guys producing for them either. They've got the safety from Utah who's just
Marcus
been a solidifying factor back there. They've got Hendrickson, the edge guy, who's contributing on the pass rush already. They have the Anzalone, who would be a starter. He was a day one starter at linebacker. He's injured right now, but he would still be starting if he were healthy. That's such a rare thing to have that good of a class. But that being said, when you're a team like that, especially that already has a quarterback in place, and then you have a draft class like that, you're instant contenders on a team that was just a mess in so many different areas, especially on that defense.
Right.
And they're playing at such a high level now that we're talking about them as legit Super Bowl contenders.
You're right. And it's basically just that one draft class that turned it around.
It really is. And they had to be fair, they had a good 2016 as well. I think they're getting good production out of them. But to get so many guys making such a huge production, and certainly Ryan Ramchik's a guy that really they saw as a luxury. He was just the best guy left on the board at that point, and they said, hey, why not? And they had to play him right away at left tackle, and it's a good thing they got him. And now he's playing solid at right tackle, and they're set there for the foreseeable future. And, they're – man, this is a fun team to watch, and I love seeing how the rookies are performing. They're playing so well.
Yeah, bravo, Saints. All right, we have been hitting up some of the teams that we know just really aren't going to make the playoffs. And so where does their fan base turn for hope? And Josh and I always say that's,
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
He was, he was the only hope besides the draft. But yes, the draft is where these teams can turn for hope. And one of those teams that could use a helping of hope right now is the Chicago Bears. And so we are bringing on our Bears expert, our resident Bears expert, Mr. Lorin Cox, to discuss the Bears roster with us. Welcome to the show, Lorin.
Yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller. It's absolutely my pleasure.
I got to tell you, man, let's address the elephant in the room. The people want to know, is it true you're 8 feet tall?
I'm not as tall as one Steve Palazzolo, but when we were together down at the Senior Bowl, we had a pretty good time looking over the rest of the room and, down at our subjects.
Yeah, that's a rough thing for me because back in the olden days when me and Plocker were doing our thing, I was always the tallest one. Now we go to events like this and I'm like number 3. That's rough for me. Yeah. Rough to my ego.
Yeah. Lauren's a towering figure. So, all right, Josh, what are you going to do? What are we going to we're going to start going down the roster here with Lorin?
Well, sure. Let's go position group by position group. Lorin, where I want to start, obviously, they took their quarterback. They're taking him along very, very slowly, I might add. But they need to get him some weapons. That's obvious. What they have now isn't happening. I don't know if Kevin White is part of the future, if he can get on the field long enough to be part of the future. But they're going to have to address wide receiver at some point in this draft. I think that much is obvious. What kind of weapons do you think Pace is going to look for? I'm not looking for specific guys, but what stylistically are they going to be looking for?
I've been starting to wonder if Ryan Pace is going to go with sort of the New Orleans Saints type approach for the wide receiver position, seemingly since that's his background, but of trying to find not your prototypical number 1 wide receiver, but get yourself 3 or 4 number 2 type receivers. No one that's necessarily going to dominate and take the full attention of coverage. But if you have a Cam Meredith coming back from injury, maybe they re-signed Dontrell Inman, who they traded for from the Chargers. Those are 2 potential number 2 quality wide receivers. And so maybe you go out and get a third one. And I don't think they're necessarily looking for a specific archetype per se, but because, Inman and Meredith, they're bigger receivers, but they're not big physical receivers as much of like an Alshon Jeffrey once was in Chicago. And they have a lot of these slot guys right now, Kendall Wright and even Marcus Wheaton can work a little bit out of the slot. They've got a decent mix here. So I think when you're looking at the Bears in the draft at wide receiver, Ryan Pace is going to go try and get his athlete. Try and get maybe not exactly another Kevin White, but I have a feeling they're going to be looking for the guy that stands out the most physically and can just be an explosive playmaker with the ball in his hands, sort of regardless of size and speed.
So not necessarily an X-type receiver we're looking at. We're looking at someone that's going to stretch the field vertically, be able to get yards after the catch, that type of player. That's what you're looking at?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, and then what is? I mean, so with the tight end situation though, you got a lot of draft capital spent on the rather large Adam Shaheen. Are you taller than Shaheen, Lorin?
I think we're a very similar height, but I think Shaheen's got me by an inch or two.
He's definitely
and probably 100 pounds.
Who would dunk? So he would dunk on you then?
Yes, for sure, certainly. I would get out of the way and make a business decision and live to fight another day.
So tight end is definitely probably not somewhere they're going to try to address with a draft pick.
Well, as much as it seems like that, I wouldn't rule it out. I think especially, in like a day 3, if there's a guy there that intrigues them as an athlete, I don't think Ryan Pace is particularly opposed to drafting a player at a position that's already pretty well solidified. I mean, last year they take Tariq Cohen in the 4th round after Jordan Howard has a breakout rookie season, and they've got Jeremy Langford coming back and Kadeem Carey. They had a lot of young running backs on the roster, and they still went out in the 4th round, and they fell in love with an athlete at North Carolina A&T in Cohen and took him. So I could easily see them doing that at tight end even this year if they're happy with Shaheen and Deion Sims and Daniel Brown and the depth they do have, but they get to day 3 and there's a guy that they like sitting on the board. I could easily see them pulling the trigger on another weapon for Trubisky.
Okay, now Lorin, that leaves obviously the offensive line. Interesting situation. I think in general they've got the interior figured out, but right tackle in particular with Bobby Massey, gotta think they want to move on from him in some capacity. What's your expectation of what they're going to do with him?
Yeah, I think one way or another they're going to try and make a change, and I don't think they're going to rush into it. I think they wanted to last year when they attempted to negotiate with Ricky Wagner in free agency and ended up losing him, perhaps in a bidding war, to the Detroit Lions. And they just kind of stuck around with Massey and didn't end up really drafting a replacement high for him and just brought back the same offensive line. So I think you might see a similar type of strategy this year. Maybe if there's a free agent out there they want to replace him with, they'll go after him. But they could very well keep Bobby Massey well through the draft. And if they get it, if the right tackle is on the board, and when they're picking that they like, then maybe they'll make the move. But they could, again, easily just continue with Massey. I think it's sort of at least a situation that they feel as a luxury that they can survive with Massey, and they don't have to upgrade the right tackle position. But clearly, I think they want to protect this young quarterback and do the most to help him, and so have to feel like right tackle is at least maybe a little bit of a higher priority this year than it was in years past.
Now, you mentioned that they tried to fix a position in free agency. Do you think that that's an area that they might attack again this year? In particular, in general, anything on the offense, do you have a sense that they would favor free agency over the draft?
I think we'll see them sign at least 1 or 2 wide receivers. I think Ryan Pace likes to throw bodies at a position and just eliminate the obvious glaring need heading into the draft, so then he does have that flexibility that he can just sit back and purely take the best player that he wants at every position. So I think you'll see them, they're not going to throw huge dollars at the number 1 wide receiver target, but a guy like Devontae Adams or some of these more second tier level wide receivers that can fit that Cameron Meredith mold, and maybe re-signing Dontrell Inman, and just trying to find those types of guys that you can kind of fly under the radar a little bbit and maybe be a little bit of a bargain deal.
We were discussing how, like Pace is a bit of a wild card and we don't really know what he's going to do or what school he's going to draft somebody from. But again, is it possible? Can you rule out, again, maybe they fall in love with the premier, one of the premier tackle prospects and they take him early? You know what I mean? Even though they might not be the most glaring need, but what if they happen to fall in love with one of the, elite pass protecting tackles?
Yeah, I think if, Ryan Pace seems to like these athletes in the first round. And so if there's a guy in this draft that really catches their eye from a physical standpoint, someone that they feel like can be a franchise, left or right tackle that can make the difference in this offense, then I absolutely would not rule it out. But I do think Ryan Pace is going to be looking for more of a playmaking type player, whether that be on offense or defense. Not to undervalue here the value of a great offensive line. I think they do recognize that. But when you have a right tackle already in place, I think Ryan Pace is looking for that extra spark here, that difference maker in the offense. And I don't know how much the upgrade at right tackle would make as much of a difference as, say, an elite wide receiver.
I could see that. Yeah, definitely. We're trying to get the more bang for the buck, more weapons on the outside for the young QB. So that definitely makes sense.
Now, Lorin, that really covers the offensive side of the ball. Let's go to the other side. Jordan and I met briefly before to just kind of gather our thoughts on where we think the team is. And then we met with you briefly before we started recording. And interestingly enough, you brought up a position that I don't know that we had necessarily thought of, and part of it is because of contract situations. Tell us what you think the future looks like at edge for Chicago.
Yeah, it seems like this is a position that it certainly needs to be upgraded, even with the guys that they have now. I mean, Leonard Floyd out for the year now with a knee injury, still trying to figure out exactly what that is, but he is supposedly on track to be back by a decent time this offseason to get back involved, so he'll kind of be there. But then there's a lot of question marks as far as Pernell McPhee, who is playing a lot of snaps right now because they just need bodies at the position, but his knees are not what they once were. I don't even know what they once were, but they're certainly not anywhere near a high functioning level. And so it's pretty likely that he's released this offseason and gets some cap freed up there. And then they have Willie Young, who's hurt again this year, but he's a consistent contributor, but another guy on the wrong side of 30. I imagine they'll probably keep him around for depth, but I have a feeling they want to try and upgrade this group because you look, even when they were pretty healthy this year, they're still not generating as consistent of a pass rush, particularly on the edge, as you'd like to see. I think their pressure percentage by our PFF numbers have definitely gone down from last year to this year, and it's just a group that needs that other premier edge talent to try and get someone to maybe take some pressure off of Leonard Floyd and Akeem Hicks on the interior and just be that complementary or perhaps even a leading type threat opposite him to really get after opposing quarterbacks. It's always protect your quarterback and get after the quarterback. Those are some of the most important stuff, and that's what you're going to try and see them try and upgrade opposite of Leonard Floyd.
Now, you talked about pace, always wanting, especially at the top of the draft, to get that top athlete, the best playmaker. And suddenly with that in mind, with the potentially losing both of those edge guys, that really seems to bring edge into play at the top of the draft, doesn't it? Especially when you consider the fact that obviously they're not going to be in the hunt for a quarterback. Yeah,
and especially with a guy like Leonard Floyd, who is, he's a certain type of rusher. He's a speed rusher, and that's kind of what he does. And perhaps he hadn't quite taken that big step forward this year that they wanted him to. I mean, he was playing well, but maybe they wanted to see a bigger step to try and be a premier edge rusher, and he wasn't quite that before his injury. And so maybe they go out and get a guy that complements that, maybe more of a power rusher, a more physical guy that's going to be maybe what they wanted Pernell McPhee to be when healthy, to try and complement and be able to throw different things at offensive lines.
What about like an interior pass rusher, Lorin, from like the defensive tackle position?
Yeah, they drafted Jonathan Bullard 2 years ago, and I feel like they've sort of been waiting for him to step up and be that complement to Akeem Hicks, and it just hasn't happened. For one reason or another, there was perhaps some weight issues early in his career, didn't quite have that same get-off that he had at Florida, and just hasn't been able to develop consistent pass-rushing moves on top of that. But then they've had Mitch Unrein this year starting opposite of Hicks, and he's played really, really well against the run. But I think they do like – their nickel package on the interior there, it's Hicks and Goldman, and they like what those two young guys can do. And so I don't think there's a single position on this team besides quarterback that I would rule out for a draft pick, maybe fullback and kicker and long snapper, but a main position that I wouldn't rule out. So, but I don't think we're going to see an early draft pick on a defensive lineman. I think they're still holding out hope for Jonathan Bullard. They also have young Roy Robertson Harris that they converted. He was an undrafted free agent from UTEP. They're a little more of an edge guy that they've had bulk up to play interior. So they have some young guys there. They like Hicks. They like Goldman. They just gave Hicks that big contract extension. I don't feel like that's a position that's super high priority. But again, the right athlete's there, the right player that falls down the draft boards a little bit that they're high on, I think they'd absolutely pull the trigger even as early as day 2.
Okay, but you see them, like, if they're going to be investing significant draft capital in a pass rusher, you see that being more so an edge prospect than a defensive interior prospect?
Yes.
All right. And then moving on to, what about the linebackers?
Yeah, they used the 4th-round pick on Nick Kwiatkowski a couple years ago, and he's really been playing well, getting sort of rotational minutes until Jarrell Freeman gets suspended here and his second PED violation, and there's some potential mental health issues that he was talking about involved with that. So and he had torn his pectoral as well, so he's out for the season. And he and Danny Trevathan were sort of supposed to be the veteran future of this inside linebackers group, at least for a year or two here. And now it looks like at least one of those two is going to be gone, probably Jarrell Freeman. They both have contracts that are pretty easy to get out of, but Danny Trevathan's got bad knees too. And they've got a young Christian Jones behind Kwiatkowski as well. But they definitely view Kwiatkowski as the future of the inside linebacker position, but they could still use that other guy. I mean, they like Jones, but I have a feeling they want better than that. And so I could definitely see with Trevathan's knee injury history, he's got a contract that's also easy to get out of. He's only 27, but you have to wonder how his long-term durability is going to look. Inside linebacker seems like a potential day 3 type of pick, but not something they're going to go heavy in investing in.
That also seems like a potential for a free agent pickup. I don't really know what the free agent landscape looks like at that position, but I do know that draft-wise, it's probably not a very remarkable group this year at that position. That's certainly was our impression leading up to this point. But yeah, that's kind of a tough thing with that defense, is because obviously, not that Floyd hasn't panned out, but you had the injury this year and it just hasn't quite developed to that level. They spent a lot of free agent capital on edge, as we discussed, and on interior linebacker. And the fact that those guys haven't played at the level they were before at their previous destinations, I think that's really been one of the major issues with this defense kind of not taking that next step.
Yeah, like one of the things the Bears defensive coordinator talked about was that like what's held back their linebackers in particular is simply their injuries, and not that just from being absent on the field, but being absent from being able to practice through most of the offseason. Danny Trevathan was on the PUP list entering training camp and stuff, and even last year entering the year, he wasn't fully able to work with the team because of nagging injuries and missed some of the season. And so you haven't had these guys practicing together for the months of the offseason and leading up through an entire year, and they only start to get into a rhythm later on in the year. And then Jarrell Freeman gets suspended last year, and now this year Jarrell Freeman's hurt, and they're putting in Nick Kwiatkowski, and you don't quite get these players that are truly masters of the middle of their defense. They obviously football is football. They know how to be put in and play at a high level. But to really be that potential Pro Bowl caliber type of inside linebacker that the Bears potentially envision them to be, they needed to be more available in the offseason at practice, and then, of course, be able to perform every week. And when you have an offense this year that can't consistently put up points on the board, then that makes everything more difficult for the defense, and you kind of see the team as a whole take that sag.
Now that just leaves the secondary for us to discuss, in particular the cornerback position, which to me, along with wide receiver, might be the most obvious issue. Really, I think they need to get multiple guys here. What do you think the plan is, Lorin?
Yeah, it's really hard to figure out what's going to happen at the cornerback position, in part just because we don't know who the new coaching staff is going to be and what the defensive coordinator is going to be like. Because right now, a Prince Amukamara, he's on a 1-year deal. And if Vic Fangio were to be the defensive coordinator again next year, which seems unlikely at this point, he seems like a natural fit to stay in this defense. The way he's playing so well this year, gets physical up at the line of scrimmage and can play man coverage down the field pretty well. Whereas opposite him, Kyle Fuller has never seemed like a great scheme fit. He's playing better this year, but this isn't quite the defense that's going to fit him well. He needs to be more in off-zone coverage and not have to be as physical. And so, but at the same time, they could bring in a defensive coordinator that might be a better scheme fit for Kyle Fuller, and maybe not as much a Prince Amukamara. But I have a feeling they're ready to move on from Kyle Fuller, and that Prince Amukamara is going to be chasing some free agent dollars somewhere else. And that just kind of leaves Marcus Cooper here, who they signed to a 3-year deal as presumably interested in him as a starter, but gets beaten out by Amukamara, and Fuller hasn't really played that well in his opportunities on the field, and kind of looking like a little bit of a dud free agent signing there. So, I mean, they could easily be in the market for 2 new starting cornerbacks if they don't feel like Cooper is really panning out. But the one place they are solid is in the slot with Bryce Callahan and Crevan LeBlanc, 2 former undrafted rookie free agents who are playing really well and still very young and provide a lot of quality depth there.
So it sounds like what you would say to be they'd be leaning towards outside corner instead of slot corner. So, as as treat Josh and I like your personal scouting department here, Lorin. Like what sort of things are you looking for in these corners for the Bears? You saying you want some press man coverage ability? Is that what we're looking for here in our prospects?
Well, it depends on the defensive coordinator. I think Vic Fangio wants guys that can be physical up the line of scrimmage in theory, and guys that are smart. It's sort of that's generally a good thing to have at the cornerback position. But I think Fangio is a guy that likes to be able to put his cornerbacks in isolation on the outside. And sometimes that's in the form of cover 3, but a lot of cover 1 and mixing things up to allow his front 7 to get after the quarterback and work. And so right now it's hard to say from a trait standpoint what they're looking for in a cornerback. But I think generally speaking in the secondary, they want playmakers. They want someone who's got a knack for generating turnovers, who's, they're not necessarily concerned per se about like tackling as well. Like Eddie Jackson, who they drafted last year from Alabama, he wasn't the most like consistent physical tackling type safety, but he's a guy that he has a knack for finding the ball and the interception. And when the ball is in his hands, he's a home run threat every single time. And so I think you're looking for that type of guy, regardless of corner, outside slot, even a safety. I think a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick fits this sort of like playmaker. Just get me a tough, smart, reliable playmaking defensive back, and they'll try and find a fit for him, try and find a spot for him as he develops. I think, especially in the early rounds, that might be what you're looking at. But later rounds, maybe you're more prototypical outside cornerback.
Well, that's a big help. Great stuff there. And then, so what about the safety then, the position? You mentioned Jackson. Can you see them doing something else there on the back end?
I'd be surprised at this point. I think they clearly wanted to upgrade over an Adrian Amos by signing a Quinton Demps, but Demps gets hurt. Adrian Amos comes back in and is the second highest graded safety by our numbers this year, and just having a phenomenal season. And so he and Eddie Jackson, two safeties under the age of 26 moving forward, I think they should be, in theory, happy with those two. I don't think Ryan Pace is ever one to turn down a playmaker in the draft at any position if it's an upgrade on their roster. But I would be surprised at this point if there was any early draft pick investment in a safety.
Okay, but so athletic playmaking corners on the outside. All right, we will go digging for that for sure. And then now we have to ask you, now that we've gone over the whole roster here, as a fan and a follower of the team, as an analyst of the team, like what do you like to see the Bears do with their draft picks? Where like what direction would you like to see with the positions? I know you don't know all the prospects yet. We don't know all the prospects fully yet either. But just like how do you want to see them use the picks?
In particular, the day 1 and day 2.
Yeah. Early on in this draft, I want a consistent, dynamic edge defender, not only as a pass rusher, but someone who can hold up against the run. And Leonard Floyd's growing in that area, but I want to see just a physical, enforcing type edge player that's going to establish the tone and really drive that character of this defense and be the premier pass rusher opposite of Leonard Floyd that can put some fear into opposing quarterbacks' hearts. And then I want to see a revamped offense for Mitchell Trubisky, whether that means a much stronger offensive line with a new right tackle and maybe some added depth on the interior and maybe a premier type wide receiver talent and even another tight end, or heck, throw another running back into the mix. Just get as many playmakers as you can on offense to make things as easy as possible around this young quarterback.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Lorin, for coming on and sharing all that stuff with us. Josh, you have anything else for Lorin before we let him go and get back to work?
No, I think it's time for him to leave.
Hey, Bears fans want to know what kicker prospects are in the market here if they need to replace a Cairo Santos.
Oh, no.
Get Gordon on.
I was going to say, this is not a Gordon podcast.
Yeah. So, Lorin, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you on Twitter?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Cox Sports One. It's like Fox Sports One, but with a C. Some people don't get that, but I appreciate the followers that do. And you can find my work there and keep up the football talk.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for joining us, and go follow Lorin on Twitter.
Yes, do so. Thank you, Lorin.
All right, Josh, that was awesome of Lorin to join us and help break down the Bears roster and where they possibly might go early on draft day. And looking at their season, like I said, we're looking at their season and trying to give them hope. We're only talking about them this early for the draft, Josh, because they're probably going to be picking early, right?
I would think so. They're on schedule to pick top 5, and there's little reason to think that's going to change. I think the development at quarterback is going to continue to move at a bit of a snail's pace because of the way they're being coached up. And defensively, I don't see them getting any better, especially with their situation at edge right now with injuries and just lack of production there. So I think they're going to continue down the path they are, which is losing most of their games.
Well, it sounds like, so if they're picking high, if we're saying like top 5, we have to sort of bring that into, that position, that slot into bear them when we're talking about like what prospects they might, be interested in. Like you mentioned, they're not going to be in the market for a quarterback. So it might be one of those, let's go, best defensive player that we could probably take there. Do you think that from what we're seeing here, and I know it's early, but do you really think corner would be in play that early for them?
I do, if there was a viable one worth the top 5 pick. And we've had them the last 2 years. I don't think that's the case this year. There's just not that kind of a caliber player at this position, which quite frankly isn't a surprise considering how good the last 2 classes have been, certainly at the top. But so I think that's a position that's more along day 2, day 3s. So when we get into talk about day 2 prospects, let's go there. Okay. I think
we'll put a
based on what Lorin said, based on what Lorin was saying, I think edge is a good place for us to start.
Okay, so we'll put a pin in corners until we get to second round, which I imagine will also be a fairly early pick.
Yes. So essentially, it's a late first round pick. That's the way I would look at it.
Starting with edge, and let's go based on what Lorin told us, right? So Lorin's saying is we want someone to play opposite of Floyd. We want someone who's going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit bulkier, a little bit stronger at the point of attack than Floyd, but we still want pass rush ability. So Josh, give me the top name on your list that's going to fit that parameter where like that's still something that could be worthy of a first round pick who's going to give you that big strong edge presence.
Yeah, and this is interesting because I think each of us had a different name immediately pop into our head. So I'll let you talk about your guy in a second. But the guy that immediately popped to me that was on the radar as a potential top 10 pick coming into the season has certainly played up to that capacity and I think solidified himself. That's North Carolina State's Bradley Chubb. I think that he's just a perfect fit in terms of a potential Suggs type player, that power edge guy that can set the edge, that can still rush the passer as well. He does a little bit of everything. He's maybe not quite as explosive as some of the other guys, but again, the Bears have that guy. They need that guy that can play the run on a consistent basis, and I think Chubb's that guy. Not to mention the fact that he has 10 sacks, 17 hits, and 28 hurries this year as well. He's just as productive a pass rusher as he is against the run.
Yeah, the other, I think that'd be a great fit. The other edge that sort of came to my mind, in addition to Chubb, was Marcus Davenport from UTSA. A guy who's grading really well against the run, not quite as well as Chubb, but who's actually generating a bit more pass rush production. He actually has 9 sacks and then 6 hits and 34 hurries on the year. The last time I checked, I think his pass rush productivity rating was like number 1, I think, among all draft eligible 43 defensive ends. So, he's got that big, long, strong frame, Josh. I think he could, set the edge in the run game there, and then also still provide that edge rush presence.
Yeah, he's the guy we're going to get to see at Senior Bowl. He's just a massive freak of a prospect. He's going to be around the 6'6", 6'7" range, probably in the 260s. So I think he fits that bill perfectly. And let's be honest, we're talking about the Bears front office and how they like those small school guys. Maybe they like him more than Chubb just because he's a little bit less known. Who knows?
And they like the freaky athlete type guys like Shaheen. So yes. So maybe you get a freaky long edge rusher from a small school. It's ticking
Checks
a lot of
all the boxes, right?
It sure does. And that Senior Bowl experience, it's going to be the Marcus Davenport coming out party this year. I think that's basically what we're going to see. That the first time he straps it up and gets in there in the pit and runs you over.
Yeah, there's looking at the early list of guys, not to get off topic, but there's a lot of really interesting guys that I think we're going to see taken at the top of the draft if they maintain and do end up going. And certainly he's up at the top of that list, and him being a small school guy, it's going to be exciting to see him there. The other position I think we do need to address, and I think there are a couple guys that fit perfectly here, again, with what Lorin was intimating they would look at, is wide receiver. And that probably scares Bears fans. Obviously, they haven't had a lot of luck with Kevin White and him being the 5th overall pick. But there's two guys in particular that really won't come as any surprise to really. I don't even think you need to necessarily have been a consistent listener to our podcast. These are two players that have been on the national consciousness the entire season. One is probably going to win the Biletnikoff for best wide receiver, and the other is certainly up there as well in terms of known commodities. First, James Washington. I think he's a great fit for, you talk about not necessarily needing the number 1 X guy, but the number 2 that can stretch the field vertically.
A field stretcher, right?
No one does it better than him, right?
Right, yeah. So that would be that nice, like you said, we're looking for perimeter guys who can sort of stretch the field, and yeah, that's a great call because he gets it. He really has shown the ability to get the haul in those deep passes.
Yeah, I mean, you look at basically every measure of deep passing we have, he leads in, whether it's yards, productivity, consistency. He's number 1. He is the guy in that category. So he makes a ton of sense.
Who's the other?
I also really like Calvin Ridley at Alabama. I love that one. Yeah. I think he's a guy, had he been in an offense like an Oklahoma State, like even like a Washington State, he's the guy that would have had the absolutely absurd numbers, maybe held back a little bit by that. Not a huge guy. He's around 6'1", 195 probably, so that's fine. He's 85 years old, so you're going to have a limited shelf life on him. But, man, is he an explosive playmaker. He's the guy that gets it done for that offense. I think he's a pretty good route runner, probably better than he's given credit for. And that allows him to do a lot of different things. And again, doesn't need to be that X guy, but can get vertical or do the work underneath and turn short gains into huge monster plays. I think he's a perfect fit for that.
Just got to get weapons for Trubisky, right? I mean, the Rams.
That has to be top priority ultimately.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the Rams are showing right with Goff and adding those weapons, that it can really change in a hurry.
Yep. Yeah, no question about that. And we saw it in Philly too, because Philly, obviously they've finally got some development out of Aguilar, but they went and got some guys for him too via the draft, via free agency. And I think we got to see the same with Chicago, and we'll see it in Kansas City for their young quarterback who's going to be taking over next year. We're going to see that everywhere, and that's the way it should be. When you invest in a franchise quarterback like that, you have to get him the weapons to succeed. In Chicago, they have to do that this offseason, and that very well could start in the first round for them.
All right, so let's switch to that second round pick, and let's go back to the corners because we had addressed that that'd be something they could possibly go after in the second round. And there's a couple different ways I want to go at this, Josh. Based upon what Lorin told us. So again, let's just say regardless if there's a scheme change or not. Again, Lorin thinks they're going to want playmakers, guys who get their hands on the ball, right? Guys who get that ball back for their offense. So, Josh, who out of these prospects who's really getting their hands on the ball and really being a playmaker?
Well, it's Joshua Jackson from Iowa.
Well, it's a terrible first name on that kid. Are you sure?
It's a great first name.
I don't know if someone named Joshua could be a playmaker, right?
No, I would fully trust him to be a playmaker because of that. That's the sole reason he's such a playmaker. What he's done this year is ridiculous. It's 7 interceptions. That leads the country, right?
Or the draft eligible corners, yeah.
Yeah, the draft eligible corners. 17 passes defended, so 17 breakups. 24 total passes defense this year. That's an absurd total. The issue with that is he's in his own scheme. So that doesn't mean he can't play man, he can't play press. But if Fangio, or at least someone that comes in and wants to run a man-heavy scheme comes in, I think there's going to be some trepidation as to whether he actually fits that, just because at this point we haven't seen that from him. So I don't know if he's an option there at the top of round 2. And quite frankly, because he's been so productive, he might not be there in round 2. So I think for our purposes, let's say that A, he's not going to be there. B, we want to go with more of a man
height,
corner
weight, speed guy,
and a height weight speed guy.
So who would be a good height, weight, speed guy there then?
Well, first off, Jaire Alexander from. Come on,
Louisville.
Come on, Louisville. You pronounce Louisville much better than I do, even though I
didn't know you were setting you up for that one. I apologize. I'm from Louisville.
Come on, Louisville. But he's a guy that he's been injured this year, but you and I looked at him in the off season leading up to this season, and he's about 6 foot 200, so he fits that height weight. Definitely has the athleticism, has the aggressiveness, the physicality you like. I think he can play the run as well. I like him in that fit. And for the Bears' sake, it probably works to their advantage, the fact that he's missed quite a bit of this season due to injury. So I think a guy like him would be a great fit there. But there's also one other guy that you and I had discussed beforehand that's in your neck of the woods. I know you love talking about him, so I'll give you the floor.
Oh, that's Isaiah Oliver from Colorado. So, yeah, he would be a nice blend of track speed with, decent NFL, like, height, length type, parameters there checked. He's at least 6 foot, right? He's got long arms, but again, with that speed, and seems like a really smart kid. He's been playing lights out ever since he got to be in that starting role, Josh. And I think that he's a guy who, week in and week out, goes against, opposing teams' best wide receivers, and it's been having a really solid year.
Yeah, he's been outstanding in virtually every game from them. He has given up 4 touchdowns, although 2 were in one game. But 2 interceptions, 9 passes defended. He's been solid all season, and he's had to be the guy in a tough conference for cornerbacks. So I think he makes a lot of sense in that capacity as well. One other name I want to throw out there doesn't meet the height weight requirements, and really that's why I think they'd have a shot at him on day 2. That's Denzel Ward from Ohio State. Obviously, Ohio State has built up quite the names in terms of being a school that consistently churns out cornerback talent. I mean, Marshawn Lattimore is as good as we've seen, and he was a 1-year starter. But Ward has a little more experience. He's really graded outstanding in virtually every game this year. He's really, really been a strong playmaker. Just 1 pick in the first game, but he also has 11 passes defended this season. He's only given up 38.2% completions on throws into his coverage. So, he's been an outstanding performer, and I think the fact that he's going to be probably around 5'10", 190, that's probably going to kick him out of the first round, but he still has that physicality, aggressiveness, and ball hawking ability that I think if they stick on the path they're currently at in terms of scheme-wise, that they're going to covet.
Well, there you go, Bears fans. We've given you a healthy dose of hope with all these prospects that we have identified via input from our Bears expert Lorin Cox and our draft expert Josh Liskowitz. So there you go, Bears fans. Look up those guys. Hit us up on Twitter. Let us know if you agree with these needs or if you agree with these prospects being good fits. But that was fun addressing the Bears. Dude, we are winding down on the season. It's like the amount of college games fell off a cliff from last week to this week, Josh. We're getting into like basically the big championship games, man. Like we got the big ones where you don't even want to talk about the Pac-12 championship because you're a hater. But so let's talk about like some of these other big championship games, Josh, that means something to you.
Yes.
And we'll start off with the. But before we say what game we're going to start off with, there's a lot of, in these games, Josh, you said there's a lot of premier defensive prospects,
Yes.
lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball for all of these teams. So, Josh, why don't you run us through the top defensive prospect for each one of the teams in these big games? So, starting with the SEC championship, Josh, Georgia, give me Georgia's best defensive prospect.
The first thing I want to say before I get into the particular prospects is, man, it seems like every year when you get to championship weekend, every game seems to have one of the two teams that's competing for it all. The other is, kind of happy to be there. That's not the case with these three games. All 6 teams could end up in the playoff. So I just think that's a rarity. It's going to make for a fun weekend. With that being said, let's start with Georgia. Obvious hit the top prospect for them on the defensive side of the ball. That's their linebacker, Roquan Smith. Number 2 in the country in tackling efficiency. Just 2 missed tackles total this entire season. He's been spectacular. He's a top athlete. He's going to be a first-round pick and probably the only off-the-ball linebacker that's a first-round pick this year.
I say, because we don't think the class is probably going to be that deep. I mean, not that we're that far into all the evaluation yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, he'll be one of the premier ones for sure.
Yep.
For sure. All right, Josh. And so as Auburn goes, last week we had discussed, one of their edge rushers, Jeff Holland. But let's talk about someone else, Josh, a little bit further off the ball. What do you got for us there as far as premier prospects at Auburn?
Their corner, Carlton Davis, it seems like he's been there forever because he's been making plays there forever, but he's certainly on the radar in that run 1, run 2 range, in part because he's over 6'1", over 200 pounds. The thing statistically that sticks out about him this year, he's been tested in coverage 49 times, given up just 22 catches. So, your success rate when you attack him is not very good at all. And I think when you combine his production with his height, weight, speed, that's going to make him a very high pick.
No doubt. All right. So the next game that we are going to discuss here, Josh, is the ACC Championship, the Miami Hurricanes, the U against Clemson. So who on the Miami's defense would you consider be their premier prospect right now?
Yeah, this one is maybe a name that some of the country doesn't know a lot about yet. But, they know a lot about this name, but not in the context of this player. His name is Michael Jackson. And he's another guy, over 6 foot, over 200 pounds. So, he checks out all the height, weight, speed boxes. Obviously, when you're a Miami corner, you're going to be fast. And you've got that size. 4 interceptions this year, 4 pass breakups. Quarterbacks testing him have a passer rating of 37.0. That's not good. But that's very good if you're a corner. And so, in other words, you don't test Michael Jackson. He's just a smooth criminal back there. And I think he's going to be another one of those names that becomes very popular come draft time.
Nice. Well, let's see
what I did there.
Let's see if he gets a pick and gets to wear that awesome turnover chain this week against Clemson.
That's what I want. That's all I want. I just want like 3 or 4 turnover chains. Miami doesn't have to win, but there's nothing that gives me more pleasure in college football this season than watching Miami players dancing on the sideline, getting all pumped up to get a turnover chain. I think that's the funniest thing.
That's awesome. All right, and then against Clemson, it's again a very talented defense. We've talked about players, in the secondary, and we've talked about different players along the defensive line. But who's the premier guy right now at Clemson, Josh?
Yeah, another almost very famous name, Clelin. Don't call me Clelin Ferrell. That defensive line is absolutely loaded with talent, not just for this year, but for next year as well. But Ferrell, in terms of pass rush, he's been outstanding. 7 sacks, 10 hits, 22 hurries, 33 total stops, though, so 26 run stops. He's only had 2 missed tackles the entire season, so he is, again, another very efficient tackler. A good all-around player as a defensive end, and he's going to be, again, we've seen those Clemson edge guys. Those guys get drafted very high, so Ferrell is the guy to remember down the stretch and heading into the offseason for sure.
At the exact same time that ACC championship game is taking place, the Big Ten championship will also be taking place between Ohio State and Wisconsin. Sorry, no Michigan, Josh. I know, again, Ohio State, who not named Bosa would be the premier, because he's not eligible, draft-eligible prospect on that Ohio State defense, Josh. And don't say Bosa, Josh, because he's not eligible, Josh. Don't say Bosa.
I won't say him, but I'm going to say a guy that has had to split reps with him because Bosa's so good. That's how good these edge guys are, that we're talking about top-end prospects that aren't even full-time players there because they got younger guys that are even better. But Sam Hubbard, 35 pressures, 23 total stops. He's really done an excellent job of developing as an all-around player. He came in, he was new to the defensive side of the ball, I believe, when he started at Ohio State, and was just an undersized guy. He's really developed his run ability, taken huge strides in that this year, and it showed. He has an all-around game now, and NFL teams are going to be excited about him.
All right. Now, in dealing with Wisconsin has historically, at least in recent years, for sure, been able to place a lot of high caliber, high quality defensive front seven prospects in the league. Josh, there's a number of them playing right now at a high level. Who would be the next version right now? Who's going to be that top front seven prospect from Wisconsin?
Yeah, I really liked inside linebacker TJ Edwards, and there might not be a more well-rounded player in the country, at least certainly not one playing on the defensive side of the ball this weekend. I mean, you look at his production in every area in terms of being a pass rusher from the interior. 4 sacks, 5 hurries, so 9 total pressures on the pass rush at a position that you don't often get that kind of production from. 38 total stops. How about his coverage? 40.5 passer rating on throws into his coverage. That's unheard of for a linebacker. And he's seen a lot of volume there, too. It's not like he just has a couple reps. So excellent all-around game. I think he's a guy that, depending how he tests out, he could be a guy that sneaks into that day 2 conversation as well. But really good all-around player for Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I know that, when you and I are looking for quality linebacker prospects, for us to see that, those green grades across the board for, the coverage and the pass rush and the run stop, that usually highlights that's a really good player that you really want to take a look at, and that's definitely the case with him. So, all right, Josh, thanks you for picking out the best defensive prospect, for those 3 big games this week for everyone to keep an eye on. I don't know how they're going to keep an eye on the ACC and Big Ten championship at the same time, unless they have one eye on each game. Possibly 2 TVs, maybe sports bar type situation. I don't know, Josh. Don't judge them. All right, Josh, anything else that you want to throw at everybody on the way out?
No, I'm sick of talking, and I'm definitely sick of you at this point.
Josh is always sick of me, everybody.
All right. Wear me out.
Enjoy the big games.